Hello, everyone. In this video, we are talking about top 10 ERP systems for startups in 2025. So let's dive in. My name is Sam Gupta. I am principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent vendor agnostic analyst and advisory firm. We help customers with technology selection, change management, and digital and business transformation strategies. On that note, let's go back to today's topic, which is the top 10 ERP systems for startups in 2025. Before we look at the list, let's understand how we define startups. For us, startups are going to be companies that are going to be in under $10 million in revenue or something similar metric. If the revenue might not be the best indicator for those companies. So these companies generally have very similar characteristic business model as well as the way their organizations are structured, the kind of needs they are going to have from the business process perspective. And in this particular case, we are looking at all different industries. The list is for the products and not necessarily for the ERP vendors. So if they might have multiple products, we are looking at each of them and we have ranked them appropriately. Generally, these companies are founder-led, and founder is probably going to have the most cross-functional intel in general. And then the most of the team members, they don't have as much overlap across the functions. And generally, the way these organizations are structured is that they can live with the siloed systems. They don't need to have as much cross functional consolidation. And the reason for that is because the problems are not as big at this stage, at this point of time. Their budgets are very limited as well. They just don't have as much appetite for the consulting. The team might not have as much maturity, as much appreciation for consulting, as well as their problems are not necessarily as big for them to appreciate these things. So the criteria that we generally use for these lists is, and that's what we have used for this particular list as well, which is the product share, acquisition strategy focused on startups, ERP, product roadmap, community, ecosystem, win rate, technology strategy, as well as the investors. So now let's look at the list. Number 10 on our list is ECI Macola. And ECI Macola is very old proven system, and they have come a long way in general. They have a lot of installations compared to any of the systems that are going to be in their size and the category. They are fairly comparable, adopted, well liked in general. The reason why they don't rank as high on this particular list is because of some of the complexity with the product. And again, that is not against the product itself. In this particular market segment, the companies are not going to have as much implementation budget, and this particular product would require a little bit more implementation budget in general, just because the number of layers that you are going to have with the product, they are slightly higher, richer, and again, that increases the complexity of the implementation. So that's the reason why they are not ranked as high compared to the other solutions that we have on this list. Overall, this is a slightly legacy platform, so it's not going to be as innovative as some of the other newer platforms that we have on the list. So the strengths for ECI Macola is they have very tightly integrated data model from the ERP perspective. Some of the ERP systems, they might be debatable, questionable, from the ERP perspective, whether they have the same tightness from the data model perspective or not, and whether you are going to get the same outcome that you would expect from slightly larger ERP systems. Sometimes that could be debatable depending upon the integrity of the data model and the tightness, embeddedness of the data model. But in for ECI Macola is a has been a very proven ERP system. It has the majority of the mature processes, such as your MRP, etc. Generally, those are going to be slightly more advanced processes. And again, depending upon how deep do you want to go into the MRP processes. So this is going to be a great fit for any of the distribution center companies. That's where they are probably going to have majority of their logos. And then the one layer that we have here is this is especially applicable as well as useful for the FMCG distributors. They might not have as many integrations among the industrial distributors. ECI Macola has been used among the manufacturers as well, but generally those are going to be slightly lighter manufacturers. They might not be as involved industrial manufacturers, etc. But for the most part, ECI Macola is a great product, and it's also SQL based. So that's another plus that we have for ECI Macola. Now, some of the limitations to keep in mind is number one, as I already pointed out, that you would probably need consulting help. And the technology roadmap is not as clear just because it is owned by ECI, and ECI has a lot of products in their portfolio. At this point of time, it's very hard to predict what they are going to do with each of the products, especially if they are going to lose market share for those products. So again, you do your own research in terms of how confident you feel with respect to these products. So that is going to be a little caveat that we are going to mention here with respect to ECI Macola. And it might not be as cloud native as some of the other products that we have on this list. So from the technology perspective, it might be slightly weaker. So that's number 10. Now, number 9 on our list is ERP Next. And ERP Next is the open source product. It's very comparable to Odoo. The community may not be as big as Odoo, but it is well liked, well proven among smaller startups. So if you prefer open source, then ERP Next could be a great product to consider include as part of your evaluation. Some of the strengths to keep in mind from the ERP Next perspective is it is easier for startups outgrowing QuickBooks. Again, it's going to be slightly easier product compared to other products. For example, let's say if you compare this with ECI Macola, they might have a lot more richer processes. They are designed for slightly more advanced businesses. ERP Next is designed for the beginner or the early stage companies that are outgrowing QuickBooks. Ecosystem and development help, generally that is available, but the ecosystem might not have as much business expertise, business background. Generally, you are going to find a lot more developers, but for ERP implementations, you are probably going to require the business consulting expertise as well. So that might be a little con there, but also you have the community. So at least if you prefer to customize a lot of things, then you might be able to find much cheaper developers in their ecosystem. And some limitations to keep in mind from ERP Next perspective is that they limited support for advanced ERP transactions. So again, you are going to find a lot of capabilities that are slightly more, let's say, if you talk about the customizability of the solution, you can do that. But when you talk about the advanced ERP transactions, the ones that you are going to find inside ECI Macola, those might be slightly limited with ERP Next. And some other limitations to keep in mind is limited business consulting, meaning generally it results into over engineering of the product, and that leads to implementation failure, implementation challenges. So that's going to be another challenge that we generally see in the ERP Next community. So that's number 9. Number 8 on our list is Sage Intacct. And Sage Intacct is an amazing product. It is designed for companies that are going to be slightly more service-centric industries. The solution is very rich from the accounting, finance capabilities. It might not be as rich from the operational capabilities perspective, but then their ecosystem is very rich, very strong, and you are going to find many different pre-integrated solutions that you can utilize with Sage Intacct. Sage Intacct generally has very deep capabilities for certain industries. For example, let's say if you consider this for not-for-profit, the number of reports that are going to be tailored for not-for-profit, the kind of KPIs that you are going to find, the kind of integrations that you are going to find with Sage Intacct, it might be harder to find in some other ecosystems. The same thing goes for industries such as construction. They are much richer. Real estate, they are much richer. So these are some of the industries that you need to keep in mind for Sage Intacct. If you're evaluating in these industries, then that should be one of the go-to products that you should be including as part of the list. The other strengths to keep in mind is ideal for holding in private equity companies, the number of countries and the localizations that they can support as part of the product. It's a very global product in general. I think they have over 100 countries that they are able to support. So it's very similar to NetSuite. Sometimes the number of countries that Sage Intacct is able to support may be more than NetSuite. But NetSuite is going to have a little bit richer operational capabilities compared to Sage Intacct. It might not be as rich as some of the other products that are operationally rich, but they might be financially weaker. So depending upon what your priorities are. So that's why Sage Intacct makes it a great fit, either if you are going to be part of holding companies or the private equity companies. In those situations, Sage Intacct is going to be a great product. Again, friendlier for service-centric startups, just because the kind of needs the service-centric startups are going to have, they are slightly different compared to the product-centric industries. So if you are going to be in service-centric industries, then this could be a great fit. Ecosystem as well as the consulting base. Again, you have a lot of bar partners, accounting firms that are practicing in their ecosystem. So that's a huge plus for Sage Intacct. Limitations to keep in mind is it's going to require substantial consulting help just because it is slightly more complex product from the accounting finance perspective, designed for companies that are going to be publicly traded or that are going to have audit heavy requirements. So if you are going to be in those regulated industries, then Sage Intacct is probably going to be a great fit. So that's why it requires consulting help. And then the multi-entity functionality that you are going to have, that's going to be slightly bloated. Sometimes because of the multi-entity capabilities and the way their pricing is designed, it is per entity. So if you are going to be in the industries, for example, construction or energy utility, in these industries, you have a lot more entities. So then the pricing is going to be based on that. So generally that increases exponentially, substantially, if you are going to have a lot of entities. So do a little bit of research in terms of which product is going to be better fit based on your model, depending upon how many entities you have, how many seasonal workers you have, how many transactions you have. All of these factors might play a role in terms of what is going to be your final pricing and which product is going to be cheaper for you. The other limitations to keep in mind is the integration challenges. Generally, Sage Intacct requires a lot more add-ons compared to the other products that we have on the list. And then you are dealing with too many products, too many add-ons, too many vendors, and that increases the risk from the implementation perspective. So that's a little constraint there from the Sage Intacct perspective, and that's number 8. Now, number 7 on our list is NetSuite. And NetSuite would be a very comparable product to Sage Intacct, with the only exception being NetSuite is going to have a little richer inventory-centric functionality for the product-centric industries as well. Again, NetSuite is not as rich for the product-centric industries. For example, let's say if you look at industrial manufacturing, distribution, in those industries, NetSuite may not be the best bet, but NetSuite at least covers some inventory functionality. For example, let's say e-commerce, retail, restaurants. In these businesses, NetSuite could be a great fit. Ideal for global or publicly traded startups, just very similar value prop as Sage Intacct. The way Sage Intacct is positioned in the market, NetSuite has very comparable offering as well as positioning in the market. They do really well in the service-centric space or e-commerce-centric industries or retail-centric industries. In those, NetSuite does really well. In general, NetSuite is slightly more complicated product for these startups, and then their pricing could be tricky as well for these startups. So that's going to be a con for NetSuite, especially in the startup segment. It might be trickier for mid-size, for smaller companies. That's going to be a different case. But for this segment, NetSuite may be tricky to work. So strengths to keep in mind is it's a scalable ERP. It can cover a lot of grounds until, let's say, if you are going to be $1 billion in business. So that's a huge plus. But at the same time, you are getting a lot more complexity when you might not be there in your maturity to be able to handle that. The ecosystem as well as the consulting base, that is one of the largest and one of the most prevalent in general among most ERP systems. So that's a huge plus as well, and ability to support diverse business models. That's a huge plus as well. It can accommodate a lot of grounds, but then it's also going to require a lot of add-ons, and it's going to have very similar risks as your Sage Intacct product. But again, depending upon what you care for, do you care for slightly more horizontal ERP where it can support a lot more business models, but then you need to live with add-ons? So that's going to be our only constraint. Or you can go for slightly more focused products if your business model is slightly constant. So depending upon, again, your priorities and what you care for. Some other limitations to keep in mind is it's going to require substantial consulting help, and the multi-entity capabilities, the way the problems you are going to have with Sage Intacct, they are going to be equally applicable for NetSuite as well. And then NetSuite gets very expensive in general. It is one of the most expensive product among most ERPs. So you need to keep that in mind. Unless you compare this with the enterprise products, they are obviously going to be very expensive. But even NetSuite is very expensive product in general. Even if you might get a deal in the beginning, but then that increases because of their consumption-based pricing that is not as apparent as some of the other ERP systems that we have on the list. So that's number 7. Now, number 6 on our list is Acumatica. And Acumatica is ideal for companies that are going to be present in maybe a couple of countries, maybe US, UK, Australia. If you are present in those countries, Acumatica could be a great fit. But then the beauty of Acumatica is it can support a lot more business models as part of the same product, that you don't have to utilize a completely different ERP system, but it does not have the complexity of slightly enterprise grade systems. So that's a huge plus, that they are able to do all of this as part of the same product, as opposed to utilizing another product or keeping this in another database. In this case, all of these business models will be hosted in one database. Now, the challenge that they have is they are not as global as compared to NetSuite Sage Intacct. NetSuite Sage Intacct can accommodate all of these instances as part of one database, but Acumatica would require a separate database, and there are constraints around that. So let's say if you have a lot of synergies between these entities, then in those cases, there would be challenges with Acumatica. But in most cases, the startups are probably not going to be present in as many countries, unless you are talking about startups from Europe or South America. Those startups tend to be present in many countries. Sometimes there could be challenges because of that. But in general, if you're talking about US based startups, North American startups, then in those cases, this is probably going to be a great fit. So again, from the business model perspective, it can accommodate field service, manufacturing, construction, e-com. Or if you have all of these flavors, then Acumatica is probably going to be a great fit. The strengths to keep in mind from Acumatica's perspective is it's a very scalable ERP, ability to support diverse business models. That's going to be another plus, and not as bloated with global capabilities. Limitations to keep in mind is requires consulting help. Pricing might be harder to predict with growth just because of their consumption-based pricing. So even though they are going to claim that you get unlimited users, but at the same time, the pricing might be harder to predict because of the consumption-based pricing, because it's transaction-based. So do some research there. And again, sometimes Acumatica could be the cheapest of all, just because of the pricing. But again, it's slightly unpredictable in general, the way consumption-based pricing works. And then it could be harder to learn just because it's a very complex product, just like your NetSuite or Sage Intacct. So that could be another limitation with Acumatica, and that's number 6. Number 5 on our list is Rootstock. And Rootstock is one of the best products for the startup segment. number one benefit that you have with Rootstock is it's built on Salesforce platform. And if you are going to be in industries such as the project manufacturing, or you are going to be in medical device manufacturing, engineer to order manufacturing, industry 4.0 startups, in these spaces, Rootstock does really well. It also does well in the consumer centric or CPG centric spaces as well, that are going to be slightly more distribution centric. So the strengths to keep in mind from Rootstock's perspective is the alignment with other Salesforce products. And if you are going to be really heavy in those pre-sales processes and you need Salesforce experience throughout the processes, that's when Rootstock is going to be a great fit. The mobility as well as the cloud native capabilities, and now AI as well, that they are receiving all of those AI agent capabilities from Salesforce is one of the companies that is probably investing the most with their AI capabilities, AI agents. So Rootstock is going to be one of the recipient of that R&D, and because of that, it is going to be one of the richest AI driven or AI capable products. So that could be a huge plus for Rootstock. And then the limitations to keep in mind from Rootstock's perspective is, obviously this is a similarly complex product as Acumatica NetSuite, so it would require consulting help. It's not going to be as easy as, for example, let's say if you compare this with Odoo or ERP Next, they are slightly simpler product. They are designed for smaller businesses. Rootstock is slightly bigger product in general. And then the implementation might be slightly more expensive, again, because of the same reasons. And then it might require a lot more third-party add-ons compared to other products. The number of add-ons might be similar to Acumatica NetSuite. Maybe Sage Intacct. Sage Intacct requires a lot more, but Rootstock is going to require a lot as well. But in general, with the horizontal products, you will require a lot more add-ons. They are not as deep, as rich from the operational capabilities perspective. So that's number 5. Number 4 on our list is Syspro. And Syspro is a great product for companies that are going to have discrete as well as the manufacturing processes hosted as part of the same product. And then it also has the distribution capabilities. So they are very rich operationally, the way their product works. And then the ERP layers are very similar to your ECI Macola as well. So that's a huge plus overall. Now, for Syspro, the data model is tightly integrated. So that's a huge plus, and they are cloud native as well now. So the technology is as good as any other cloud native products in general, even though it was a legacy product and they re-architected it. But now most of the products are probably at a similar level in terms of their cloud nativeness maturity. So the biggest plus with Syspro is going to be ability to support diverse business models. And then it's also going to be SQL based, which is a huge plus. In this category, a lot of products might not be SQL based. They are file based. So generally you are going to have data integrity issues because of that. But this one is SQL based. The limitations to keep in mind from Syspro perspective is, again, it's going to require consulting help. It's as complex product as NetSuite, Acumatica. It's very comparable product. So it would require as much consulting help. So you need to keep that in mind. It might be slightly harder to learn compared to the easier products. For example, let's say if you compare this with Odoo, Odoo just does not have as many ERP layers. That's why it's slightly easier to learn, but depending upon what you're looking for. If you're looking for mature ERP layers, then you should be going for products such as Syspro, ECI Macola, or maybe Acumatica NetSuite. But if you're looking for, you don't care for those rich ERP processes, primarily your goal is just to process the transactions. If that is the goal, then maybe Odoo could be a great fit for you. So those are some of the limitations, and that's number 4. Number 3 on our list is ECI Job Boss 2. And ECI Job Boss 2 is for those custom manufacturing and job shops. And some of the layers that ECI Job Boss 2 is going to have are going to be very specific to those custom manufacturing as well as job shops. And it is probably going to be one of the easiest product that you're going to find from the job shop perspective. It's tailored and flavored for those job shops. Now, the challenge that you're going to run into is, as job shop or custom manufacturing owner, your hope and goal is going to be that you can find pretty much everything from the MES to QMS integrations perspective. In this case, that might not be packaged as part of the product, and they might require some add-ons. But overall, the product is going to be much richer compared to the other solutions that we have in the market that might provide a lot more as part of the package. But then the quality of the code, quality of the product is probably not going to be as great. So you will find issues with support. Sometimes that could be buggy as well with the other products, but that's where ECI Job Boss 2 is probably going to be a great fit. And it's probably going to be friendlier for machine shops and does not require as much consulting help compared to the other richer products. For example, if you compare this with SysPro, ECI Job Boss 2 is much lighter product, much simpler product compared to that. The limitations that you need to keep in mind is the MES and QMS integration that you are going to need may not be available out of the box, and private equity ownership might not be as friendly for these startups. In general, the hope that startups are going to have is that they would expect hand holding from the support perspective, and generally private equity owned companies, they don't provide as good support, so you need to count on the external companies to be able to provide that support. But then their ecosystem is going to be limited as well, that you might not find as many companies that might be able to support that product. So those could be some of the limitations that you need to keep in mind. And the compliance, such as your AS9100, requires consulting support as well. With that, it might not be available directly from the OEM. So that's number 3. Number 2 on our list is ECI DCOM. And ECI DCOM targets those pharma and process-centric startups, DTC brands. It has very rich capabilities from the DTC perspective as well. And it was one of the most beautifully designed product overall from the technology perspective. In the ECI portfolio, if you compare this with the other products, this is probably going to be one of the best cloud native product that was there. Now, it is owned by ECI, so you are going to have a little challenges from the private equity perspective, but the product is still the same. ECI in general does not invest as much in the R&D, etc., for the products as compared to the other vendors. So that is another factor that you need to keep in mind. And the strengths that you're looking at from the ECI DCOM perspective is, number 1, it is easier to learn. But then when any product is going to be easier to learn, meaning they don't have as rich ERP layers, the data model is going to be slightly flatter. So you might run into issues when you are going to configure these processes, build these processes, and you need the scalability of those processes, that it might not be as scalable compared to the other products, but then it's going to be easier to learn. So that's a huge plus for ECI DCOM. Now, it is also cloud native, so that's a huge plus for ECI DCOM. And the last mile functionality for process as well as F&B verticals, that's going to be a huge plus as well. Some limitations to keep in mind is data model is not as scalable. It does not have the same architecture as you would expect from the ERP layer perspective, the kind of layers that you are going to need. For example, the way you are going to relate your dimensions to your chart of accounts, to your customer master, to your product master, the same scalability is not going to be there that you would get, let's say, from SysPro or other richer ERP products. And again, with this as well, the private equity ownership is not going to be as friendly as with any ECI products. And then it would require consulting help too. Even though the data model is simpler, it's not as simple compared to the other products. So that's number 2. And number 1 on our list is Odoo. And Odoo is ideal for global startups that might be limited on their budget as well as implementation. In general, the Odoo community is very large. You are going to find a lot more developers, accounting firms that are utilizing Odoo, but Odoo is not going to have as rich ERP layers that you're going to find with products such as your Acumatica and NetSuite, but that's what makes it easier to use, easier to learn, easier to adopt. So let's say if you are simply outgrowing from QuickBooks and your goal is to get just the transactional processing system, then Odoo could be a great fit. But again, when you upgrade those capabilities, get into slightly more sophisticated scenarios, for example, let's say when you get into those batch processes, or when you get into the MRP workflows, that's when Odoo is not going to be as rich, as mature compared to the other products. Ecosystem and development help. They have one of the largest ecosystems. That's a huge plus for them. And then ideal for diverse startups. Some limitations to keep in mind from Odoo perspective is the capabilities, the core ERP layers, as I mentioned, are not going to be as rich. And then open source in general comes with a lot of risks. So you need to research on that in terms of whose code you are utilizing, if you're utilizing any sort of apps from the development community. And if you are customizing yourself, then also you are going to have substantial amount of risks, because then you need to look at the maintainability of the code, who's going to maintain, even if you are able to develop, and just don't over customize, because that's when we see a lot of Odoo implementations run into challenges when the developers think that they sort of understood what was needed from the business perspective, but generally the code is not going to be as scalable. The processes that they are going to develop are not going to be as scalable. They might be able to implement these processes for the initial scenarios, and they might feel for the initial processes, but as you get into the mature scenarios, as you get into the implications of those processes, that's where these implementations run into challenges. And then you would require substantial business consulting help, even with Odoo, especially if you are going to customize. If you're not customizing, then it's a different case. Then the implementation is going to be easier. The product may be cheaper to use as well. So that's a huge plus for Odoo, and that's number one. Now, if you enjoyed this video, we are going to include a detailed report that is going to have much more depth than what we covered so far. So if you want to check that. And then this podcast is also available in the audio form. If you prefer that, head over to Spotify, Apple, as well as any other podcasting platform that you use. And you might want to hit subscribe there. And then these videos we publish on a weekly basis. So if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you might want to do that. And if you have not checked our digital transformation report, some of these lists are also available as part of that. So on that note, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.